The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the cramped television studio, casting harsh shadows across Leah Voss's weathered face. At 17, she carried scars that told stories most adults couldn't fathom. Her hands, once soft from a privileged upbringing in the research colonies, now bore the calluses and claw marks of someone who had learned to survive in the wild territories of Kepler 442b. The news anchor, Marcus Chen, adjusted his tie nervously as he reviewed his notes one final time. This was the interview that would make or break his career, the first sit-down with the girl who had survived 8 months among the Grillax, the apex predators that had claimed the lives of every previous human expedition to Sector 9 Cora. "Are you ready, Leah?" Marcus asked, his voice barely concealing his excitement. Leah nodded, her dark eyes reflecting a wisdom that seemed impossible for someone her age. Around her neck hung a pendant made from what appeared to be a Grillax claw, polished smooth by months of handling. The studio crew exchanged glances. They'd all heard the stories, but seeing the physical evidence made it real. Rolling in 3, 2, 1. The camera operator pointed his finger at Marcus. "Good evening, I'm Marcus Chen, and tonight we have an extraordinary guest. Leah Voss, the sole survivor of the research vessel Meridian, which crashed in the forbidden zones of Sector 9 Cora 8 months ago. Leah, thank you for joining us." "Thank you for having me," Leah replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to share. Marcus leaned forward. "Let's start with the question everyone wants answered. How did a 16-year-old girl survive alone in territory that has claimed the lives of trained military personnel and seasoned researchers?" Leah's fingers traced the claw pendant absently. "I wasn't alone," she said quietly. "That's the first thing people need to understand. I was never truly alone." "You're referring to the Grillax pack that allegedly protected you?" "Not allegedly. They did protect me. But it wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy." Leah's eyes grew distant. "Trust in deadly predators and their cubs was not easy. It took everything I had to give, and more than I thought I possessed." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This was already more than any government official had been willing to reveal. "Tell us about that first encounter." Leah closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, they seemed to look past the cameras, past the studio walls, back to a jungle that had nearly killed her and ultimately saved her life. "The crash happened during the night cycle. Our ship's navigation systems failed during a solar storm, and we went down hard in the canopy. I was thrown clear during the impact, which probably saved my life. When I came to, the ship was in pieces, scattered across nearly a mile of jungle floor." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "My parents, they didn't make it out. I spent the first 3 days calling for them, not understanding that my voice was also calling every predator in the territory to my location." The studio was silent, except for the hum of equipment. Even the camera operators had stopped their usual shifting and focusing. "The Grillax found me on the 4th day. I was delirious from fever, dehydrated, and had infected cuts all over my arms and legs from the crash. I'd climbed into the broken cargo hold of our ship, thinking it would provide shelter. Instead, it became a trap." Marcus swallowed hard. "What happened when they found you?" "The alpha male came first. Cora, that's what I eventually called him. He was massive, easily 3 times the size of Earth's largest predatory cats, with those distinctive 4 eyes that give them perfect depth perception and night vision. His coat was midnight black with silver striping, and when he moved, it was like watching liquid shadow. Leah's description was so vivid that several crew members unconsciously stepped back from their equipment. He could have killed me instantly. Should have, by all accounts. Grillax don't typically play with their food. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the way I didn't run, I was too weak to run. Maybe it was because I didn't scream. I'd lost my voice from calling for my parents. So he just left you alone? No. He circled the cargo hold for hours. I could hear his breathing, the sound of his claws on the metal hull. Every few minutes, one of those four eyes would appear at a gap in the wreckage, studying me. I later learned he was deciding whether I was prey, threat, or something else entirely. Marcus realized he was holding his breath. What convinced him you were something else? For the first time since the interview began, Leah smiled. It was a sad, knowing expression that transformed her scarred features into something almost luminous. His cubs. The next morning, I heard them before I saw them. Grillax cubs make this chirping sound, almost like earth birds. They were playing in the wreckage, and one of them, a small female with a damaged paw, got stuck in a piece of twisted metal. The studio was completely silent now. She was crying, this sound I'd never heard before but somehow understood completely. Her father was trying to free her, but his claws were too large, and every attempt was making the metal cut deeper into her leg. Without thinking, I crawled out of my hiding spot and approached them. You approached a Grillax Alpha and his cubs. While they were in distress. I know how it sounds. But in that moment, I didn't see deadly predators. I saw a parent trying to help his injured child, and a child in pain. I'd spent my entire life around animals, my parents were xenobiologists. I knew that look, that desperation. Even on an alien face. Leah's voice grew stronger as she continued. I had a small plasma cutter in my emergency kit. Nothing that could hurt a Grillax, but precise enough for delicate work. I showed it to Cora, demonstrated on a piece of debris so he could see it wasn't a weapon. Then I pointed to his cub. He let you approach. He didn't stop me. There's a difference. Every muscle in his body was coiled to strike if I made one wrong move. But he let me cut the metal away from his daughter's paw. The moment she was free, she bounded away to safety, and I expected him to tear me apart. But he didn't. No. He did something I never expected. He touched his forehead to mine, so gently I barely felt it, and then he left. Just melted back into the jungle like he'd never been there at all. Marcus looked at his notes, then back at Leah. That was your first contact with the Grillax. But you spent 8 months with them. How did that relationship develop? Leah's smile grew more genuine. That's where the real story begins. Because earning their trust was nothing compared to learning to trust them. And that lesson almost killed me more than once. The camera held on her face as the first segment faded to commercial, leaving viewers across the colonial territories with more questions than answers. And a burning desire to know how a human girl had achieved the impossible, finding family among the most feared predators in known space. The Kepler 442b jungle was nothing like the nature documentaries Leah had watched as a child. Those films had sanitized wilderness, showing the beauty without the constant, grinding pressure of survival. Here, in Sector 9 Cora, every sound could herald death, every shadow might conceal fangs, and every moment of inattention was potentially fatal. 3 weeks had passed since her first encounter with Cora and his cubs. Leah had managed to establish a rudimentary shelter in the ruins of the Meridian's cargo bay, using salvaged materials and techniques she'd learned from her parents' field guides. But survival was a daily battle against infection, dehydration, and the creeping madness of isolation. She was attempting to purify water using a makeshift solar still when she heard them, the distinctive chirping calls of Grillax cubs. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she crept to the edge of her shelter. Through the dense undergrowth, she could see movement. The same cub she'd helped, the one with the injured paw, had returned. But she wasn't alone. 2 larger cubs flanked her, their coats showing the mottled patterns of adolescence transitioning to adult markings. All 3 were watching Leah's shelter with unmistakable curiosity. The injured cub, whom Leah had privately named Echo for her distinctive call, took a step forward. Her paw had healed well, showing only a thin line of scar tissue. She made a soft, chirping sound, almost questioning. "Hello, Echo," Leah whispered, not daring to move. "You brought friends?" As if understanding her, Echo chirped again, then began what could only be described as a demonstration. She padded to a nearby stream, demonstrated how to identify safe drinking water by the way it moved over certain rocks, then showed Leah which plants growing along the bank were safe to eat and which would cause the violent illness that had plagued her first week. The other cubs joined in, creating what Leah later described as the most important classroom of my life. They showed her how to recognize the calls that meant storm coming versus large predator approaching. They demonstrated the art of moving silently through the dense undergrowth, a skill that would save her life multiple times in the coming weeks. But the most crucial lesson came when they taught her about the territory itself. Grillax society, Leah learned through careful observation, was built around family units that controlled specific territories. Cora's pack held domain over nearly 30 square miles of jungle, encompassing the crash site. Within that territory were smaller zones, hunting grounds, denning areas, neutral spaces where cubs could play safely. Echo and her siblings were showing Leah these boundaries, teaching her the invisible rules that govern their world. Cross into a hunting ground during active hunt time, and even Cora's protection might not save her. Enter a denning area where a mother was nursing, and she would face challenges that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with maternal instinct. The cubs visited her shelter almost daily, and with each encounter, Leah felt her understanding of their world deepen. She learned that Grillax communication was far more sophisticated than xenobiologists had theorized. They used a combination of vocalizations, scent marking, and body language that conveyed complex ideas about everything from weather patterns to emotional states. Echo, in particular, seemed to take pride in her role as teacher. She would bring her siblings to observe as Leah practiced techniques they'd shown her, offering encouragement through soft chirps when she succeeded and patient repetition when she failed. It was during one of these teaching sessions that Leah made her first critical mistake. She had been practicing stealth movement under Echo's tutelage when she heard a sound that made her blood freeze, the deep, rumbling call of an adult Grillax in distress. Not Cora's voice, but something else. Something wrong. Echo and her siblings immediately flattened themselves against the ground, their playful demeanor replaced by instant alertness. Echo made a sharp, urgent sound that Leah had learned meant danger, hide. But Leah's human instincts overrode her hard-won jungle education. The distress call sounded like pain, like an animal in trouble. Before she could think through the consequences, she was moving toward the sound. She found the source in a small clearing about half a mile from her shelter. A female grillax, not one of Cora's pack, was trapped in what appeared to be an abandoned research snare, probably left behind by one of the previous failed expeditions. The metal cable had tightened around her rear leg, and her struggles had only made it worse. Blood stained the device and the ground around it. The female was smaller than Cora but still formidable, her coat showing the golden striping that marked her as a different lineage entirely. When she saw Leah approaching, her four eyes locked onto the human with unmistakable hostility. This was not a grillax that had learned to trust. This was a predator cornered and desperate. Leah froze, suddenly understanding the magnitude of her error. She was outside Cora's territory, approaching an injured predator who had no reason to see her as anything other than a threat. The female's lips pulled back, revealing fangs that could punch through ship hull plating, but the snare was cutting deeper with every movement. Without treatment, the female would either bleed out or be forced to gnaw off her own leg to escape. Leah had seen the aftermath of similar injuries on Earth animals. It was a death sentence delivered in slow motion. The plasma cutter was still in her belt kit. She could free the female, but it would require getting close enough to touch her. Close enough to die if she misread the situation. Easy, Leah whispered, though she knew the female couldn't understand her words. I want to help. The female's response was a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. Leah began moving in a slow, deliberate circle around the clearing, staying well outside the range of claws and fangs. She demonstrated with the plasma cutter on a fallen branch, showing how it could cut through metal without causing burns. She pointed to the snare, then to her tool, trying to communicate her intentions. The female watched every movement with predatory intensity, but something in her posture began to shift. Perhaps it was recognition of the same tool that had freed Echo. Perhaps it was simple desperation. Whatever the reason, she stopped growling. I'm going to approach now, Leah said, as much to steady her own nerves as to communicate with the grillax. Please don't eat me. She moved with all the stealth techniques Echo had taught her, every sense alert for the slightest change in the female's demeanor. When she reached the snare, she could see the full extent of the damage. The cable had cut to the bone in places, and infection was already setting in. Working quickly but carefully, Leah activated the plasma cutter. The female tensed at the sound, but held still as Leah began severing the cable. It took 3 precise cuts to free the mechanism completely. The moment the snare fell away, the female sprang backward, putting distance between herself and Leah. For a heartbeat, predator and human regarded each other across the clearing. Then the female did something extraordinary. She pressed her forehead to the ground in what Leah would later learn was a formal gesture of acknowledgement among grillax. Not submission, acknowledgement. Recognition of a debt. When she raised her head, her 4 eyes held something that looked almost like respect. The female limped away into the deeper jungle, but not before making a sound Leah had never heard before, a complex vocalization that seemed to carry layers of meaning. Leah didn't understand the full significance of what had just happened until she returned to her shelter to find Cora waiting for her. With Echo and the other cubs arrayed behind him, his expression was unreadable, but his posture suggested he had been there for some time. Waiting. Watching for a return. When he saw her, he made the same complex vocalization the female had used. Only this time, Leah heard it echoed by other voices from the jungle around her, cubs, adults, entire family groups she had never seen before. She was no longer just Echo's student or Cora's curiosity. Something had changed in the past few hours, something that would reshape not just her survival, but her understanding of what it meant to be part of a pack. The real test of trust, she was beginning to understand, wasn't about learning to depend on the Grillax. It was about proving she could be depended upon in return. The morning of Leah's 40th day in the jungle brought with it a crisis that would test every lesson she had learned about Grillax society. She woke to silence, an unnatural quiet that made her skin crawl with instinctive dread. In the weeks since freeing the injured female, whom she'd named Amber for her golden stripes, Leah had noticed changes in how the local Grillax packs interacted with her. Where once she had been tolerated as Cora's strange pet project, she was now acknowledged with the complex vocalization she had come to understand meant pack friend, a designation that carried both privileges and responsibilities she was only beginning to grasp. But this morning, something was wrong. Echo appeared at the edge of Leah's shelter before dawn, her usual playful chirps replaced by sharp, urgent calls. Her body language spoke of barely contained panic. When Leah emerged from her improvised dwelling, Echo immediately began leading her deeper into Cora's territory, toward the pack's primary denning site. They moved through the jungle with desperate speed, Echo pausing only to ensure Leah could keep up. As they traveled, other Grillax materialized from the shadows, cubs, adolescents, and adults all converging on the same destination. The air was thick with scent markers that Leah had learned to read: distress, anger, and something else. Something that smelled like blood and fear. The denning site was a natural amphitheater carved into a hillside, with multiple cave entrances providing shelter and escape routes. Under normal circumstances, it would be a place of safety and peace. Today, it was a war council. Cora stood at the center of the gathering, his massive form tense with barely controlled rage. Around him, the adult members of his extended pack formed a defensive circle. At the outer edges, cubs and adolescents watched with wide eyes, their usual playful energy replaced by the solemn attention of young predators learning about mortality. When Echo and Leah arrived, a ripple of awareness passed through the assembly. Dozens of four-eyed gazers turned toward the human girl, and Leah felt the weight of their collective attention like a physical force. Cora approached her with measured steps, his expression unreadable. When he reached her, he made a sound Leah had never heard before, a deep, mournful vocalization that seemed to carry the weight of terrible loss. Then he stepped aside, revealing what had prompted this gathering. Amber lay on a bed of soft jungle moss, her golden coat matted with blood and dirt. The leg that Leah had freed from the snare had been savagely mauled, but that wasn't the worst of her injuries. Claw marks raked across her flanks, and one of her four eyes was swollen shut. She was alive, but barely. Beside her lay something that made Leah's heart clench with grief, a small cub, no larger than Echo had been when they first met. The little one's coat bore the same golden striping as Amber's, marking her as the female's daughter. She was motionless. "Oh. No," Leah whispered, dropping to her knees beside the injured pair. Cora made another sound, this one carrying undertones of anger and frustration. Other adult Grillax joined in, their vocalizations painting a picture that Leah slowly began to understand. Amber's pack had been attacked. Not by another group of Grillax. Territorial disputes were common but followed strict rules of engagement that protected cubs and non-combatants. This had been something else. Something that had shown no mercy to the innocent. Through a combination of scent analysis and careful observation of the adult's behavior, Leah pieced together what had happened. The attackers had been Grillax, but not any she had encountered before. Their scent markers were wrong, carrying chemical signatures that spoke of aggression and hunger that went beyond normal predatory behavior. Cora approached Leah again, his massive head lowering until his eyes were level with hers. The intelligence. She saw there was unmistakably human-like in its complexity. He was asking her something, but the question was too nuanced for their rudimentary communication system. It was Echo who provided the key to understanding. The young female moved to Amber's side and made a soft sound, the same call Leah had heard her make when she'd been trapped in the wreckage. It was a call for help, but more than that. It was a call for the kind of help that required trust, skill, and courage. Leah's medical supplies were limited to her emergency kit and whatever she'd been able to synthesize from jungle plants. But Amber's injuries were severe enough that without treatment, she would die. The question was whether Leah could provide that treatment without causing more harm. More importantly, she was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about medical aid. The gathering, the formal presentation of the injured female and her cub, the way Cora was watching her, this was a test. Not of her loyalty or her courage, but of her understanding of what it meant to be part of a pack. In Grillax society, Leah had learned the pack was everything. Individual survival meant nothing if it came at the cost of the group's well-being. The strong protected the weak, the skilled aided the injured, and everyone contributed according to their abilities. Amber wasn't part of Cora's immediate family group, but she had become pack through Leah's intervention. By freeing her from the snare, Leah had created a bond that carried obligations. Amber's survival was now, in some complex way, Leah's responsibility, but there was more to it than that. As Leah knelt beside the injured female, she began to see the broader implications of what was being asked of her. The attackers were still out there. Whatever had driven them to break the fundamental laws of Grillax society made them a threat to every pack in the region. If Amber could be saved, if she could recover enough to communicate what she had seen, it might provide crucial information about how to protect others. Leah opened her medical kit and began working. Her supplies were limited, but she had knowledge that the Grillax did not. Human understanding of anatomy, infection control, and surgical technique. She also had something perhaps more valuable, experience with interspecies medicine gained from years of accompanying her parents on research expeditions. Cleaning Amber's wounds required a careful balance of antiseptic agents that would fight infection without poisoning a Grillax's unique biochemistry. Leah had learned from her early mistakes with jungle medicine that what was safe for humans could be lethal for other species. As she worked, the entire pack watched in silence. Even the cubs seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just about saving one injured female, it was about whether a human could truly be trusted with the most fundamental responsibility of pack membership, protecting those who could not protect themselves. Amber's leg wound was the most serious injury. The bone was fractured and the surrounding tissue was badly damaged. With proper equipment and facilities, it would have been a challenging but manageable case. With jungle medicine and improvised tools, it bordered on impossible, but Leah had advantages that traditional medicine lacked. She understood Grillax psychology well enough to keep Amber calm during the procedure. She had access to local plants with properties that complemented her human medical supplies. Most importantly, she had motivation that went beyond professional duty. The small cub beside Amber stirred as Leah worked on the mother's injuries. For a moment, hope flared in Leah's chest. But when she examined the little one more closely, her heart sank. The cub was alive, but barely. Her injuries were internal, the kind of trauma that required sophisticated medical technology to address. Leah looked up to find Cora watching her with an expression that seemed to convey both hope and resignation. He understood what she was seeing. The cub was beyond saving, but Amber might not be. Working through the day and into the night, Leah stabilized the injured female's condition. She set the broken bone using techniques her mother had taught her. For emergency field medicine, she sutured the worst wounds with improvised thread made from plant fibers. Most importantly, she managed to establish a combination of local anesthetics and human pain medications that allowed Amber to rest without falling into the kind of shock that would have been fatal. As dawn broke over the jungle, Amber's breathing had stabilized. Her remaining 3 eyes tracked movement with awareness that suggested she would survive. It would be a long recovery, and she would never hunt with the same speed and power she had once possessed. But she would live. The small cub had passed peacefully during the night. Her pain ended while her mother was too sedated to feel the loss immediately. Cora approached Leah as she finished her vigil beside the patients. His massive form moved with the careful deliberation of someone making a momentous decision. When he reached her, he did something that left the entire pack in stunned silence. He lowered his great head and touched his forehead to Leah's in the gesture she had come to recognize as respect between equals, but then he went further. He made a complex vocalization that was immediately echoed by every adult in the gathering. It was the sound Leah had been hearing for weeks without fully understanding its significance. It was the sound of acceptance. Not as a curiosity or a temporary guest, but as pack. As family. As the ceremony concluded and the gathering began to disperse, Echo approached Leah with something in her mouth. It was a small bone carving, worked with the kind of precision that spoke of hours of careful effort. The design was simple but unmistakable, a representation of the claw pendant Leah wore, but modified to include elements that were purely Grillax. "Thank you," Leah whispered, accepting the gift. Echo chirped softly, then nuzzled against Leah's hand with the affection of a younger sister. As Leah looked around the denning site, watching cubs play under the protective eyes of their parents, she realized something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer trying to survive until rescue came. She was no longer counting the days until she could return to human civilization. She was home, but in the distance, carried on the morning wind, came the sound of hunting calls that didn't belong to any pack she knew. The attackers were still out there, and her new family was still in danger. The real test of her place in the pack was yet to come. The attack came 3 weeks later, just as the first moon was reaching its zenith in Kepler 442 b's night sky. Leah woke to a sound that froze her blood, the distinctive battle cry of Grillax in Mortal Kombat. She had been sleeping in the denning site since Amber's rescue, her presence accepted as naturally as if she had been born to the pack. Her recovery shelter, built with both human engineering and Grillax instinct, occupied a small alcove that provided both privacy and quick access to the main gathering areas. The sounds of conflict were coming from the outer perimeter of Cora's territory, but they were moving closer with alarming speed. Leah grabbed her emergency kit and the simple weapons she had crafted, a plasma cutter modified for combat use and a staff carved from ironwood that could channel electrical charges from her power cells. When she emerged from her shelter, she found the denning site in controlled chaos. Adult Grillax were forming defensive positions while cubs and adolescents were being herded toward the deep caves that honeycombed the hillside. Echo appeared at Leah's side, her usually playful demeanor replaced by the focused intensity of a predator preparing to fight for her family's survival. Cora materialized from the shadows, his massive form seeming to absorb the moonlight. His four eyes blazed with an fury Leah had never seen before, and his body language spoke of barely contained violence. When he saw her, he made a complex vocalization that she had learned meant, "Stay with the cubs." But as the sounds of battle grew closer, Leah began to understand that this wasn't a typical territorial dispute. The attacking calls were wrong, carrying harmonics that spoke of madness and hunger beyond normal predatory behavior. These were the same attackers who had nearly killed Amber, and they were coming in numbers that dwarfed anything the pack had faced before.